Welcome to the deep dive. We cut through the noise, stack up the sources,
Right.
and hopefully give you the knowledge you need. Today, we're diving into something pretty big, really a media earthquake. The indefinite suspension of Jimmy Kimmel Live on ABC.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
A major network show just gone overnight almost.
And this is so much more than just, a show getting canceled. It feels like a real flashpoint.
Absolutely. It brings together political anger, these massive corporate deals, billions of dollars.
And fundamental questions about free speech, right?
Right.
In the U.S. media landscape,
Yeah,
the speed of it all is just stunning.
exactly. And how quickly it all happened, that really tells a story about how political power might be working right now. So our job today really is to unpack this. It's complex. You've got Kimmel's comments after Charlie Kirk's assassination.
Right. Very charged comments.
And these two totally opposing stories trying to explain why the show got pulled. One is about accountability, community values.
Holding the media responsible, civility, that kind of thing.
Right. And the other side is terrified about government coercion,
Right.
basically. A direct threat to the First Amendment.
Okay. And just setting the scene quickly, Kimmel's show gets suspended right after these comments air,
Almost instantly.
within hours.
And it comes after threats, serious ones, from station groups, these affiliates, and crucially, the FCC chair appointed by Trump.
Yeah. So we really need to figure out how all these pieces, politics, regulation, corporate money, fit together to make this happen. It's pretty unprecedented for late-night TV.
Let's start right at the beginning then. What exactly did Kimmel say? The content that kicked this whole thing off.
So the comments were in his Monday night monologue. He's talking about Charlie Kirk's death, already a hugely divisive topic, and he goes directly after the Republican side. What were the actual words?
Well, it was classic Kimmel in delivery, but the content was sharp, very accusatory. He said, and I'm quoting here, "We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it."
Okay, so the core accusation is political manipulation of a tragedy, saying they're misrepresenting the killer's affiliation for political points.
Exactly. He's accusing them of deliberately framing the narrative around the killer's motive to suit their own agenda.
But there's a timing issue here, right? He made that statement before all the official details about the killer's background were fully public.
That's absolutely crucial, and it's central to the misinformation charge that came later. Kimmel was speaking right after the assassination. Things were chaotic, lots of speculation flying around. Then authorities released details suggesting the killer, grew up conservative, but had recently, within the last year, adopted what they called leftist ideology and pro-LGBTQ views.
So Kimmel's initial take, calling the killer one of them, meaning the Maggie gang, didn't quite align with those later details.
Correct. And critics jumped on that discrepancy, arguing it wasn't just a mistake in the heat of the moment, but maybe a deliberate attempt to smear conservatives right when the nation was grieving.
And Kimmel didn't exactly walk it back the next night. He kind of doubled down, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Tuesday night, he kept going. He focused a lot on how he felt the administration was handling the tragedy. He mocked President Trump's public reaction.
Yeah, I remember that bit.
Compared it to how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish. Okay. Pretty biting stuff. And he specifically called out Vice President J.D. Vance for guest hosting Kirk's podcast.
Seeing that as fanning the flames.
That seemed to be his view, yeah.
Yeah.
That instead of uniting people, they were using it to deepen political divides. The satire was pointed, it was personal, and it was relentless.
Okay, so those are the comments. Highly charged, very critical. Now, let's get into the how of the suspension. Because like you said, this wasn't just ABC headquarters making a call. It started locally.
Yeah, that's what makes it unusual. It was immediate, and it seemed pretty coordinated, coming from these big regional broadcast groups. The first domino was Nexstar Communications Group.
They run a lot of ABC stations, right?
73 of them. Big footprint. They announced they were pulling the show, effective immediately. Their statement said Kimmel's comments were offensive and insensitive at a critical time in our national political discourse.
Wow. 23 stations pulling a network's flagship late-night show. That's a massive blow, particularly in regional markets.
It really is. And then, almost immediately, Sinclair Broadcast Group joined in. They actually own even more ABC affiliates than Nexstar.
So the two biggest players basically said, no more Kimmel.
Pretty much. Sinclair used similar language concerns about community values, sensitivity around the tragedy. So once these huge groups effectively blockaded the show across large parts of the country.
And the regulatory threats started bubbling up.
Right. That's when ABC, the parent company Disney, acted. and they acted fast.
Get the indefinite suspension, not a slap on the wrist, a full suspension.
Exactly.
Indefinite.
The speed was incredible. And you felt it on the ground, too. Sources talked about the audience lined up for the Wednesday taping in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Just turned away, shows canceled, no real explanation given right then. It was just done. It really showed how quickly this pressure from affiliates and potentially regulators translated into concrete action, a shutdown for forces way outside the studio.
Okay, let's shift perspective now and try to understand the arguments for the suspension. The narrative that says, look, Kimmel went too far, his comments were irresponsible, insensitive, and action was needed. Media accountability, community values, especially after a tragedy like Kirk's death. President Trump was obviously quick to support this view.
Oh, immediately. It was framed as a huge win. He posted on Truth Social, called it great news for America, and actually congratulated ABC for having the courage to do it.
He didn't hold back on Kimmel personally either.
No, not at all. Called him zero talent, claimed his ratings were terrible, worse than even Colbert, if that's possible. So right away, it's framed not just as a principled stand, but as getting rid of a critic who was, in Trump's view, failing anyway.
And he didn't stop at Kimmel. He used it as a chance to go after others, too.
That's a really important piece of context. He immediately urged NBC to cancel Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers, calling them two total losers.
Right. So it wasn't just about Kimmel's specific comments. It was part of a broader push against late-night hosts critical of his administration.
Exactly. Using the Kimmel situation as leverage, maybe hoping to create a chilling effect.
But the official justification, the institutional weight, really came from the FCC, specifically Chairman Brendan Carr. What was his core argument against Kimmel's kind of comedy?
Carr, who's a Trump appointee, didn't mince words. He called Kimmel's comments truly sick. His main argument, philosophically, was about the changing role of these hosts.
How so?
He argued they'd gone from being, court jesters, entertainers making fun of everyone, to becoming court clerics.
Court clerics. Meaning what?
Meaning they were enforcing a specific, narrow political ideology. He basically accused them of being political operatives disguised as comedians.
Okay. And how did he explain the actions of Nexstar and Sinclair, the affiliates who pulled the show? Because that was pretty unprecedented.
He championed it. He called it an important turning point. He framed it as local broadcasters, the ones supposedly closest to the community, standing up and saying, this content from the national network doesn't align with our community's needs and values.
So portraying it as a grassroots accountability move, not a top-down political hit.
Precisely. Localism versus the network elites. That was the narrative, that the network had somehow violated the public trust inherent in using the public airwaves.
Let's dig into that misinformation charge Carr leveled. He said he had a strong case against Kimmel, ABC, Disney. What's the regulatory angle there? I mean, the First Amendment is pretty broad.
It is, but the FCC does regulate broadcast licenses based on the public interest. Historically, they've dealt with things like obscenity, or way back, the fairness doctrine, though that's long gone.
So how does misinformation about a killer's politics fit in?
That's where it gets tricky. Carr seized on Kimmel's initial statement that the killer was part of the McGay gang, which, as we discussed, didn't fully match the later official reports about the killer's recent shift towards leftist views.
Right.
Carr basically argued this wasn't just an error, but Kimmel intentionally spreading false information to score political points during a tragedy. He framed it as a violation of the trust that comes with using a broadcast license. Critics would say this was the pretext he needed to threaten regulatory action.
And the demands from the affiliates themselves made the political angle pretty explicit, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Sinclair didn't just want the show off the air. They actually spelled out what Kimmel needed to do to get back on.
Which was
a direct apology to the Kirk family. Okay, maybe understandable. But also a meaningful personal donation to the Kirk family and Turning Point USA, Kirk's conservative organization.
wow. So demanding financial support for the political movement of the person Kimmel was criticizing?
Exactly. For critics, that demand proved it wasn't just about sensitivity or taste. It was about political allegiance and essentially paying tribute to the other side.
Okay, so that's the accountability argument. Now, let's flip to the other side, the view that this was pure censorship, government overreach, and corporations caving under pressure. The political reaction from Democrats was intense.
Immediate and very strong. California Governor Gavin Newsom really set the tone, calling the cancellations coordinated and dangerous. He flat out said the Republican Party does not believe in free speech and is censoring you in real time.
Strong words. And Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called for bipartisan condemnation.
Yeah, he argued this shouldn't be seen as okay just because the target was someone critical of the current administration.
Yeah.
That the principle mattered regardless of who was being silenced.
And some Democrats in the House went directly after the FCC chair.
They did. Called for Brendan Carr's resignation, accusing him of corrupt abuse of power for bullying ABC. Some, like Senator Chris Murphy, went further, suggesting Kirk's tragic death was basically being used as an excuse for a wider campaign to silence critics.
This wasn't just Democrats, though. The criticism came from other high-profile figures, maybe most notably former President Obama. What was his warning?
Obama drew a direct line. He said the administration, after complaining about cancel culture from the left for years, had taken it to a new and dangerous level
How so?
by routinely threatening regulatory action against media companies unless they muzzle or fire reporters and commentators it doesn't like. His main point was constitutional. This is precisely the kind of government coercion that the First Amendment was designed to prevent.
That's a powerful statement from a former president, though critics might point to actions under his own administration regarding journalists or leaks. How is this different?
That's a fair point to raise. Past administrations have definitely clashed with the press. But the argument here, from Obama and others, is about the method. It's the explicit use of a regulatory body like the FCC, which holds the power of life and death over broadcast licenses and multi-billion-dollar mergers as a weapon to force content changes or firings. It's less about legal prosecution, more about direct economic coercion tied to speech.
Which brings us to this legal term, jawboning. Can you explain what that means in this context?
Sure, jawboning is essentially when the government can't legally order censorship, so instead it uses its influence or leverage to pressure a private company like ABC, Disney, or Nexstar to silence speech the government doesn't like.
So the government gets the censorship outcome it wants without technically violating the First Amendment itself, because it's the private company taking the action.
Exactly. The government just applies pressure, maybe an implied threat about a pending deal or a license renewal, and the company caves. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE-A, they jumped on this immediately.
What do they say?
They said the timing car makes public threats. Hours later, ABC suspends Kimmel, tells the whole story. Their conclusion? Another media outlet withered under government pressure.
And their concern is the precedent this sets.
Absolutely. If a popular host can be taken off the air because the president and his allies dislike his jokes, then FIRE argues that essentially means media hosts serve at the pleasure of the president. That fundamentally undermines the idea of a free and independent press.
And Kimmel got a lot of support from within the industry, right? From fellow comedians and hosts.
Almost unanimous support, it seemed. Stephen Colbert, who's had his own run-ins, called it blatant censorship. He labeled Trump an autocrat trying to control speech.
David Letterman weighed in, too.
Yeah, Letterman used the term managed media. He said, you can't go around firing somebody because you're fearful or trying to suck up to an authoritarian criminal administration. Pretty strong stuff.
A lot of the defense focused on the nature of Kimmel's speech, that it was satire, commentary, not straight news reporting.
That was a key theme. The Producers Guild, the Writers Guild, they condemned the suspension, stressing that satire is vital for dialogue and expression. Actors, comedians came forward too. Jean Smart from Hacks made a great point.
What was that?
She said, what Jimmy said was free speech, not hate speech. And she added, people seem to only want to protect free speech when it suits their agenda. It highlights that satire, by its nature, pushes boundaries and critiques power, but that doesn't make it unprotected speech.
Okay, this is where we really need to connect the dots. The political outrage, the First Amendment arguments, how does that translate into a network like ABC actually pulling the plug? It comes down to corporate leverage, doesn't it? The FCC threats worked because billions of dollars were on the line.
That's exactly the mechanism. The political pressure hits home because these massive media companies have huge business deals, absolutely critical to their future, sitting right on the desk of the regulator, the FCC, which happens to be led by an appointee politically aligned with the administration being criticized.
It creates incredible vulnerability.
Huge vulnerability. Let's look at the specific deals that were in play right when Kimmel got suspended. Start with Nexstar, the affiliate group that made the first move.
What was their big interest?
They were, and maybe still are, seeking FCC approval for a massive merger with Tegna, another broadcast group. We're talking $6.2 billion.
Wow. That's transformational for a company like Nexstar.
Absolutely. It's key to their whole strategy to get bigger and compete nationwide. And, maybe not coincidentally, Nextstar's chairman had been publicly praising the FCC's deregulation efforts, saying it helps them compete with big tech and legacy media.
So they had a very strong multi-billion-dollar reason to stay on the FCC's good side.
You could certainly interpret it that way. Pulling Kimmel's show, citing community values, might also look like a move to appease the regulator holding the keys to their $6.2 billion deal.
Okay, that's Nexstar. What about ABC's parent company, Disney? Even a giant like Disney isn't immune.
Not when it comes to regulatory approvals.
Yeah.
Disney had its own major deal needing the FCC's blessing,
Which was
the acquisition of the NFL network by its sports behemoth, ESPN.
right. That's a huge deal for sports broadcasting dominance.
Crucial for ESPN's future content strategy and market share. So imagine you're Disney. An FCC chair who suddenly becomes hostile could delay that deal, add costly conditions, maybe even kill it. That's potentially billions in future revenue at risk.
So both the affiliates and the parent network had massive financial incentives to avoid antagonizing the FCC chair.
Precisely. They were structurally dependent on his goodwill, or at least his non-interference.
And this is where FCC Chair Carr's comments shift from general criticism to what sounds like a direct threat, leveraging that dependency.
It became very explicit. He went on a right-wing podcast, and sources reported him basically linking action against Kimmel to regulatory outcomes. He reportedly said, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way."
The hard way meaning.
He explicitly threatened the broadcast licenses of ABC affiliates if they didn't act against Kimmel. That's an existential threat. Lose your license, you can't operate. So you have the threat to future profits via merger approvals and the threat to basic operation via license renewals. Powerful levers.
And Kimmel's suspension was announced just hours after those podcast comments became public.
The timing, as Fire pointed out, is incredibly suggestive.
Mm.
It really looks like corporate fear winning out over defending their host's speech. The calculation seems to have been risk losing billions in deals or suspend one controversial host.
And this wasn't necessarily the first time we've seen a pattern like this recently involving regulatory pressure and media outlets critical of the administration. You mentioned the Stephen Colbert situation earlier.
Right. The Colbert precedent is interesting. His show was canceled months prior. The official reason given was financial reasons.
Yeah.
But it happened shortly after CBS's parent company, Paramount, settled a big $16 million defamation lawsuit brought by Trump. And then, soon after that settlement, the FCC approved Paramount's huge, somewhat controversial $8.4 billion merger with Skydance Media.
And the Skydance connection.
The owner of Skydance is David Ellison, son of Larry Ellison, whose name is a close Trump ally.
Okay, so the sequence is critical host, lawsuit settlement, major merger involving an ally gets approved. It certainly paints a picture.
It suggests a possible pattern, yeah. Critical speech leads to corporate pain, lawsuit, pressure, followed by corporate concession, settlement, cancellation, followed by regulatory reward, merger approval.
There was a media analyst, Alice Enders, who had a pretty evocative description for this whole dynamic.
She did. She called it the court of King Trump. Her point was that the FCC, with its control over these essential deals and licenses, has become the key lever.
And her conclusion.
That any media company seeking a major deal or needing license renewals essentially has to toe the line. Political loyalty, or at least silence, becomes intertwined with commercial success, even survival.
This really brings us to the bigger picture. If this is the dynamic for a huge star like Kimmel at a giant like Disney, what does it mean for everyone else? For media diversity, for public debate? Does it create a chilling effect far beyond late-night TV?
That's the major concern, and there's evidence it might be happening. Some watchdog groups are tracking what they call a cancel crusade. They're documenting cases where professionals, not just famous hosts, but teachers, firefighters, journalists, nurses, all sorts of people are reportedly being fired or disciplined for expressing political opinions online, particularly opinions critical of the administration or related to sensitive events like Kirk's death.
And this isn't just online mobs. There was actual government endorsement of this kind of pressure, wasn't there?
That's a crucial point. It wasn't just random people complaining. Vice President J.D. Vance went on Kirk's podcast right after the assassination and explicitly told listeners, if you see someone celebrating Kirk's murder online, call their employer.
Wow, that's basically the government encouraging citizens to police each other's speech and get people fired for it.
It certainly looks that way. It moves from public shaming to something closer to state-sanctioned, employer-enforced censorship of views deemed unacceptable.
We already know Trump targeted Fallon and Myers right after Kimmel. How are other big media players navigating this climate? Are they feeling the pressure too?
It seems widespread. NBC hosts are clearly on notice. Major newspapers are also facing intense pressure. The Washington Post, for example, broke a decades-long tradition by not endorsing a presidential candidate. The New York Times is battling a massive defamation suit from the Trump administration.
And there's the ownership angle too.
Right. We're seeing ongoing media consolidation, often involving billionaires who have financial or political ties to the current administration. Think about the Ellison family's stake in Paramount Skydance, or the potential buyers lining up for TikTok. More concentrated ownership, potentially by politically aligned figures, could naturally lead to less diverse or critical content.
So when you pull it all together, you're left with this fundamental clash. On one side, you have the argument for media responsibility, for sensitivity, especially around tragedies, a need for community standards. That's a legitimate concern.
Absolutely. No one wants media outlets to be needlessly cruel or inflammatory during sensitive times.
But on the other side, you have this deep fear that regulatory power control over licenses, mergers, billions of dollars is being systematically weaponized to silence critics and enforce political loyalty.
Exactly. And that's the core tension you have to grapple with. Was the Kimmel suspension a genuine local-driven response to offensive content like Carr and Nexstar claimed? Or was it government jaw-boning, pure and simple financial blackmail, forcing a network to censor a critic?
Because when the government pressures a private company like Disney to kill content it doesn't like.
Critics say that is censorship. Functionally, it might not be a direct government order, but the effect is the same. Speech is chilled, not just for Kimmel, but potentially for anyone watching who might want to criticize the administration. It suggests that for these big media companies, maybe the risk to their bottom line now outweighs the principle of free expression.
The vulnerability seems undeniable. So the key takeaway for you listening isn't just that Kimmel got suspended, it's the how. It reveals the structural weakness of even giant media networks when their core business interests depend on the very government officials their commentators might criticize.
Right. Political favor, or at least avoiding political disfavor, seems to be morphing into a cost of doing business in the media world right now.
This whole saga really highlights how political pressure, amplified by figures like the FCC chair, can translate directly into corporate action because of those massive deals hanging in the balance.
It was incredibly effective, incredibly fast, which leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for you to consider. If America's biggest broadcasters now have to weigh the value of political satire against a potential loss of billions in deals, or the revocation of essential licenses, does that mean the traditional role of the late-night court jester is effectively over? Has caution replaced critique? Something to think about as you watch how this all continues to unfold